Shabbat Shalom, everyone. There is a tired joke that I loathe that tries to explain Jewish holidays. They tried to kill us, we won, let's eat. I loathe it because it's overused. I loathe it because it simplifies our history. But at its core, when it is unpacked, it embodies what is the Jewish and Zionist narrative. A narrative that takes us from depths and despair and pain to elation and exuberance and jubilation. That's what it means when it says they tried to kill us and we won. That we go from these extremes of happiness to sadness, forth and back. In essence, we are like rubber bands that pull and stretch and then contract in different directions. And it's getting hard to be the elastic on that rubber band. Today, the Shabbat marks 52 years since the tragedies that happened to 11 Olympians from Israel and Munich, Germany. It was a dark and horrible day on Connellestrasse when armed, masked Palestinian terrorists entered into the Olympic Village dressed like athletes and took over the Olympic dormitory of the Israelis, held them hostage for hours upon hours, took them in a foiled and failed attempt plan to escape from Germany, and then killed them all. I wasn't alive, I was born a year later, but I can still hear from the replay of the tapes of year after year after year, Jim McKay saying, "They're all gone." It was a piercing and painful moment for lovers of sport, lovers of Jews, and lovers of Israel. On July 4th, 1976, basically 4 years later, there was another moment for the Israeli people. A moment that an airliner, an Air France airliner, was hijacked and diverted to Entebbe, Uganda. All of the non-Jewish and non-Israeli passengers were released from the plane. The crew had the opportunity to be released. They refused to leave. And they were held hostage in Entebbe. Israel, under the leadership of a joint task force that was planned by Rabin and Peres, came up with a crack team that would sneak into Entebbe in a very elaborate way and take out those holding the hostages and recapture them and fly them home. Without getting into all the details of what is nothing short of a miracle, that happened. We went in and we repatriated all of those people. We flew under night of radar 1,000 feet over the ocean for hours upon hours to get to them, to save them, and to bring them back. They landed in Ben Gurion Airport to a hero's welcome, and there was dancing, and there was celebration, and there was jubilation. It was another modern-day miracle. And there, the rubber band contracted. 4 years after Munich, we have Entebbe. The total opposite feeling of that amount of despair and destruction. This idea of yin and yang pulling at us is nothing new in our Jewish history. In 1967, the Israeli people had a moment of absolute euphoria. A moment where in 6 days they conquered 3 other armies that were invading on them, and took them over in an unprecedented display of acumen, precision, and warfare. They had captured in that time all of the Sinai Peninsula, the Golan Heights, the entire West Bank, and on the third day of the war, I heard Mati Gur say, of course I wasn't alive then either, Har Habayit bi'adenu, Har Habayit bi'adenu, the Temple Mount is in our hands. It was only after the third day that Israel went up and dealt with the problem of Syria and the Golan Heights. To think that we had destroyed the Egyptian army, this enormous army, in the amount of hours that others would have spent weeks and months fighting. Unprecedented, unheard of. People were skipping around Israel for weeks and months and years after 1967, thinking that they were invincible. And then 6 years later, on October the 6th, Yom Kippur, when most Jews were in synagogue in Israel, the Syrian and Egyptian armies invaded. And through their invasion, they gained not only the upper hand, but put Israel up against a wall to where we thought that this nascent Jewish state would soon be eradicated. To the point where the prime minister was ready to put her finger on the button that had a nuclear option. So just 6 years before, we're dancing in the streets at our amazing ability to have strength, vitality, and precision in warfare. And 6 years later, our backs are up against a wall. We lost thousands of soldiers, and we are looking at our only option of survival, which is a nuclear option. We went from elation to desperation. I've been thinking about that rubber band pulling and contracting as I have been thinking about two parents. Two Jewish parents, one who I've met, one who I've never met, but most of us know. The first is Amos Shalit. He's the father of Gilad Shalit. His son was taken captive by Hamas in 2006 and brought into Gaza. And he decided single-handedly he was going to bring the plight of his son to the Israeli people and the government. He set up a camp outside Prime Minister's house, whoever the Prime Minister was at the time, and insisted that the plight of Gilad and his return to his family be known. He sat there day after day, night after night, month after month. The entire government and people chipped in together to make sure that even though he couldn't work because he was sitting vigil in this tent, that all of his needs and familial needs would be taken care of, his mortgage would be paid. The community bandied around him. And then sure enough, ironically, on the holiday of Sukkot, Gilad was returned to Israel. 5 years later, he was in captivity, he was held against his will by Gazan Hamas terrorists. But he came home. And his father was one of the first to speak to him and then greet him. And they hugged in an embrace that only a parent could appreciate and understand. And all of us felt that embrace, and all of us felt that sense of miracle. Personally, I was thinking of the verses that we say when we daven the Amidah Mechayeh HaMatim, who brought the dead back to life, because in essence, it was as if Gilad was brought back to life. None of us saw any proofs of life from him. The Red Cross didn't see him. He didn't talk to any of his family for 5 years. And then he comes back and he hugs his mother and his father. Eventually, Gilad gets married, and he lives as much of a normal life as can be in Israeli society. And I juxtapose that parental figure to the ones of Rachel and John Poling Goldberg. All of us know exactly who they are. And all of us have become familiar with their son Hirsch. We were hoping, praying, believing desperately that he was going to be another one of those moments of Entebbe, of 67, of Shalit. Another moment of miracle and jubilation where he would run back into his mother's embrace because she, in particular, and he, Rachel and John, brought the plight of their child front and center to every American who was willing to listen, to the whole country of Israel. You couldn't walk a city block anywhere in the state of Israel without a picture that said, "Bring Hirsch home," and bring them all home. And what Hirsch represented was the face of all of the hostages. And then we learned last Saturday night, that Hirsch would be no Gilad Shalit, that he would come back to Israel in a way that we all dreaded, in a casket, draped with an Israeli flag. Saturday night, when I had heard that there were hostages that were found, it was my daughter who told me that the family, the Poland family, had announced that Hirsch was one of them. I didn't want to believe it, because it was on a Saturday morning just a few months before that I awoke in June, and I heard about this miraculous endeavor of Israeli crack team commandos, much like Entebbe, but in a new generation, that brought Noah Argamani and Almog Meir John and Shlomo Ziv and Andrei Kozlov, brought them back from captivity into the arms of Israeli soldiers and onto Israeli helicopters and back into their parents' embrace. Almog Meir John's mother stood right here as we sang Hatikva, her arm around me, and we cried, and I could only dream that she would come back with her son to this synagogue. I could only dream that she would have that embrace. And without articulating it in my mind, I wondered, was she going to have a Munich or an Entebbe? Was she going to have a 67 or a 73? Was she going to have a 45 of Auschwitz or a 48 of Ben-Gurion declaring the state of Israel? What was going to be her reality? And when Cain Farhad Al-Qadi came home just about 2 weeks ago, I kept hoping more for that 67, for that 48, for that Entebbe moment. But instead, 6 boxes came home. And they contained Hirsch Goldberg Poland, Almog Sarusi, Carmel Gat, Ori Danino, Alexander Lobanov, and Eden Yerushalmi. It was a moment that pulled on the rubber band so far that I'm afraid it's going to snap. There are people in this community and congregation who turned to me and said, "Rabbi, you've been very outspoken about Israel for your entire tenure here at the temple, and very outspoken on this war. Why haven't you written or said anything after the return of these 6 dead hostages and the brutality that they had to endure?" And my confession to all of you is that I have nothing to say. That my soul literally feels like that rubber band, and I'm afraid no different than when I pull it too tight that it's going to snap, and when it does, it's going to sting so hard that I will drop it. You see, the difference between what happened in Auschwitz in 45 and the state of Israel in 48, or what happened in 1967 in the Six-Day War versus 1973 in the Yom Kippur War, or what happened in Munich in 72 or in Entebbe in 1976, the difference is that we had at least a few years to process that volley of emotion. It's still not enough time to process, but it's time. And here we're literally going From week one of repatriating a live Israeli hostage to the next week of bringing home 6 dead ones who were alive just hours before. The emotions are pulling in such directions at such a vigorous pace that I'm afraid of our collective, and I'm definitely afraid of my personal rubber band reaching its limit and stretching to the point of breaking. Because I don't know if the composition of the human soul is created in a way to withstand this level of euphoria and despair in such a finite, short amount of time. We've barely had time to process the events of October 7th, when we started in a war and learning forth and back of those who were going to be released and not released, those who were released, proofs of life, not proofs of life, soldiers who died, soldiers who did miraculous events. And we are being pulled and contracted like that rubber band. And I'm worried that our elasticity could run out. Usually this time of year, from this bima, I like to talk about Elul, about doing tshuva and repentance and getting ourselves on the right track for a new year. Find all the places where we did wrong and make it right. And find all the places where we're right and make sure that we can maintain that. And I don't think any of us are off the hook this year. I think we have a lot to learn from. I think we have a lot to grow from in our personal lives and our collective lives. But I would argue something that we shouldn't do and that I'm not accustomed to doing is that there are also others in our midst, some Jewish and some not, who clearly have some repentance to do, who clearly have some soul searching to do, who clearly have some inward looking to do, whether it's on college campuses or around the water cooler. There are those who have to make right that which is wrong. And I would argue this year that God has some making right to do with the Jewish people. Clearly, our history has been one that has brought us from extremes and polarities of depths and jubilations, of despair and desperation, and hope and exhilaration. But never, never in our history has it happened in such a short amount of time. And I worry for our young people's souls and for those who aren't so young and our ability to process it. And as Desi Arnaz would say to Lucille, God, you have some explaining to do. As we enter this season, all of us can look inward. All of us can be better. But we also have to do some self-protection. And while we can wag a finger at God, and I actually believe it's quite healthy to do that, we need to make sure that our souls are in a place as best as we can with whatever support systems are available to tolerate, to deal with these unbearable lows and these miraculous highs. May this year bring us just a sense of hope and equilibrium. And may it bring peace to the homeland of Israel. May it bring peace to every single family member who laid their loved ones to rest this week. And may it bring one more set of Entebes and 48s and 67s to the 101 remaining hostages so that they can come back to that embrace and know the fate of Amos Shalit as opposed to Rachel Poland Goldberg. Shabbat Shalom, everyone.